All right, so we discussed pumps in series, but now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about them in parallel. All right, so what does that mean? Well, that means they both get an individual feed, and then of course they both have an individual output that is then brought together, okay, by a little device here, a little Y, and then ultimately they're both going to be singularly forcing their outputs into one particular output right here. So it's a little bit different. The series is one is going to feed the other. This one, they get their individual feeds and then they're together feeding one particular output. So let's see what that looks like. We're already here in our mode here to where we were doing it in series, okay? So the first thing I want to do is I want to hit this. I'm going to be dealing with water. I'm going to go ahead and shut this off real quick. And then I'm going to just go ahead and disconnect this particular pump. Now, why am I disconnecting this pump? Well, there's no reason to go put any extra strain on these wires here. So I'm going to put them out of the way because I'm going to be dealing with all of these particular fittings here. So what I need to do is I need to find all of my plumbing. Pardon me for crossing the camera. One of the key pieces here is the Y. So again, we're going to have each individual is going to have its own feed. And then from that feed, it's going to take this particular, both of the outputs back into here, and then it's going to go through this section. So we're going to leave the flow meter alone from the flow meter to the output here. We're going to close that off. We're going to close everything off that we can so that we don't get any leakage here or there. And then we're going to start the process. So let's see what the process looks like. Oh, I think I found where my my O-ring is supposed to go. So I'm going to go ahead and put that O-ring on here. I know I'm going to need this, so I'm just going to go ahead and hook that up immediately. Okay. Not super tight, but tight enough. Then what we're going to need to do is I got to take this away. This is my output. I got to take that away and give it to my own input over here. So what I want to do is kind of do it as swiftly enough to where I'm not losing a terrible amount of fluid out here, because now we're going to have to prime both pumps. That's going to be a little bit more of a challenge than priming just the one pump. So again, we're going to break this thing free. We're going to be careful not to lose too much fluid at one time. Just want to pay attention to make sure that all my stuff is turned off. We're going to let this drain out as much as only necessary, and then we're going to reconnect over here, making sure my O-ring is on the face. Okay, so now notice here, this pump has its own individual feed, which is actually going to be over here. Okay, so that's what we have there. And now this output, okay, is going in the right place, but the output here needs to actually go in along with it, and that's where we're going to have our Y. So we're going to have to connect some stuff here. We have our input, that's good. And we are missing an O-ring, so I'm going to have to find that before we go too far. Even if I have to rob it from somewhere else, we're going to have to do that. And I'm going to connect this here. I'm not going to make it too tight because I want it to be able to swivel a little bit while I'm connecting things. Kind of set this somewhat into place. Go ahead and start this connector as well. Okay, got that tight. And it may be necessary, I'm not sure yet, but it may be necessary to actually move this here. So we might do that just very quickly. We're going to move that forward a little bit, and that gives us a little bit more room here to make those connections so we're not bending those lines as far. So we're going to probably move it up one more. And that looks really good right there. I think I'm going to have enough to be able to manipulate that there. Okay. So again, we are missing missing one of the O-rings here. We're going to have to check our box to see if we have an extra. And it does appear we have a stash of these things, which is advantageous for us. I'm going to disconnect that. And we're going to reinstall this over here. And that will allow us to break this free. We're going to allow the water to partially drain from there. I'm going to set him off to the side. My O-ring stayed. And now I'm going to try to reconnect out here. And again, after you start the process, you may realize that, hey, I need to get a little bit more room, so you may need to move some things around even again. All right, so now we're going to go back and check our connections, make sure they're not exceedingly tight, but they're tight enough. Okay, and now let's take a look at the situation we have. So I have a feed here that feeds this pump. I have a feed here that feeds this pump. And then my output gets linked together over here into one. And so I have one output, two inputs and one output. Okay, so I'm running these in parallel. All right, so let's figure out how to make this all work. I'm going to go ahead and take the time to plug this back in so I don't forget. Sometimes you might have to unwind these a little bit. Make sure that there is enough room for all of these. Sorry for blocking the camera. But we have those all plugged back in. We have some room. These lines here are going to be critical and they're going to be helpful. What we can do is we can use these to help the process of bleeding. Okay, so I'm going to turn this on. Make sure that I have my valves open for both of the feeds. And what I'm going to do is see if I can get water to fill this area. And sometimes it's nice to put this small line down to get water to flow so that we can get the air out, but it looks like this whole thing here has tiny little air bubbles. It's totally fine. So I'm going to take this away from this one and I'm actually going to plug it into this one. Okay, and I'm going to perform the same thing. I'm going to put it kind of low and I'm going to let some water get out, but what that's going to do is it's going to allow water to go from my feed into my pump. And if I have a steady stream of water like I do right here, then that's going to tell me that I actually have water flowing all the way up to this fitting. So that means that the entire pump here is filled up with water, and that's exactly where we want to be. So it looks like both of these things are primed. I'm going to go ahead and open up my output over here so it's actually going to flow back into the tank. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and fire this thing up and observe. Taking our e-stop off, and we're going to start the process. Both of these pumps are running. Looks like I have 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, 12. Okay, so I'm getting my flow over there. So it definitely looks like I'm not seeing any air bubble. I do see a large air bubble here that I may have to deal with. So how we're going to deal with that is we're going to try to not too hard, but flex the line in order to work that air bubble out. Very difficult to see on the camera, but I do have a big air bubble there. I do have my lines open, so this is good. All right, again, I'm still just working this, trying to get this air bubble out. And I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. So what you saw me doing here was just trying to do a little trickery. I know I'm getting some output here because I actually have some flow. It looks like this guy over here is actually pumping okay. And so because it's pumping okay, it's providing some flow. So by tapping into that flow and trying to force it back into the intake here, I was trying to put a little bit of extra water in here for this thing to move, but it looks like it's not going to give me that opportunity. So what I'm going to do is go back to the original thought, and that is plug this here and wait for the stream. Now, if you notice that plugging in up here, I'm not getting, okay, now I'm getting a little bit of flow. I'm going to try to move this around and try to get that bubble. There we go. Try to get that bubble to kind of flow towards that pump and go in the upward direction. And you can see, you might be able to see in the video, but it kind of spit on me. And if you can see the line, it keeps getting dark and light, dark and light. That is showing the air bubbles getting pumped out of that. So what I'm doing is, again, trying to get the spot here where the air bubbles are lower so that the air will travel up. And the idea is to get the air up, in, and out of this fitting right here, which will make the impeller completely covered in water. So we are very close to this. I don't like putting a whole lot of pressure on lines, but it is important to get these things bled out. And it doesn't help that these lines are all crossed. It doesn't allow me to get the air bubble to go exactly where I want it to. All right, so it looks like we got a little bit more done here. So we're going to turn this back on and see what happens. And I'm just watching this hose here. Okay, now the air bubble was small enough it was able to actually pull it out. So now when I look at this line, I don't see a light shadow of anything. Same thing over here. So now I'm getting full capacity out of both of these pumps, and that's how we're going to be able to prime that. Now, just like we talked about in the other videos, we're going to be hooking up these test lines to the different outputs to see what pressures we're running. We're also going to be using this over here to see how much flow we actually get. And then we're also going to be changing the amount of flow by stopping the water from coming out and then seeing how the flow and the pressure actually react.